Welcome to the Sustainable Tairawhiti meeting, Thursday, the 8th of September. Councillor Wharehinga, you're in charge of organising Karakia. Are you doing it, or Councillor Gregory?
I can do it. I can do it on behalf of us.
Thank you.
Right. Kia ora tātou. Morena whānau mi noi tātou. A tira marama nuku, tira marama rangi, ko koe kai pauri te ngākau o tangata. Kia mā wete wete te ngākau o tangata. Te rāti tūwhiri ka tūwhiri, te rāti tira marama ka tirama. He koia te mahara, tango he te ata mai, hei pau tūwhiri mau, hei pau kōrero mau, hei pau ata mai mau, tūturu whiti whaka maua kia tīna. Haumi e hui e tāhi. Just for context, that karakia is about enlightenment, wisdom, solid decision making for the day. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, just what we need. I have an apology from Councillor Faulkner for lateness. I have an apology from Councillor Akuata Brown leaving at 10:30. Any other apologies? If not, I'll move that. Seconder?
Yes. Moved
by myself, seconded by Councillor Burdett. All in favour? Contrary, carry. Do I have declarations of interest? If not, let's go to our minutes, page 4. And we have 2 sets of minutes, so take a look. It's between page 4 and 10. We'll talk about that first. I have a mover in Councillor Burdett. Both? Thank you. Councillor Burdett moved both. Councillor Foster.
Yep, thank you. On page 5, it says an update of the Makarori Master Plan and Alvin Neighbourhood Play System will be given at the 8th of September Sustainable Tairawhiti meeting, and there's nothing in our agenda that signifies of that update. So could I just get an update of that, please?
So through you, Chair, I believe an update is actually coming to the Operations Committee.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or a seconder for the minutes? Seconded by Councillor Sheldrake, both sets of minutes, moved by Councillor Burdett, seconded by Councillor Sheldrake, all in favour, contrary, carried. Councillors, I take you to page 12, our action sheet, only one. Emissions reduction targets. We'll get an update on the 25th of October. Thank you for that. We move through our governance work plan. Without further ado, I want to say what an interesting agenda. Without further ado, we move to page 16 of 140, and we'll be talking about keeping of animals, poultry, and bees bylaw review, issues and options. So, Ms. Noble, I'll hand over to you and Mr. Gilmore just to walk us through it, and then I'll open the floor for questions, discussions, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'll leave it to Mr. Gilmore to take you through the paper.
Thank you, Chris.
Good morning, through the chair. This report does what it says on the tin. It's the first report in the process for making a new keeping of animals, bees and poultry bylaw. It serves 2 purposes. It obviously seeks the 2 resolutions as stated in the purpose, but also gives an opportunity for feedback on the review and initial draft bylaw. We'll obviously be coming back to you, back to the new council in the next training for approval to consult on a formal draft bylaw. So, any questions?
Thank you. I just want to clarify, we're not talking about details in here today or discussing what's in the current bylaw. What we are discussing today is this the most appropriate tool? And then say, yes, we will review it. Any questions or queries? Councillor Robinson, thank you.
Madam Chair. So, Chris, can you just clarify, page 22, option 1 talks about the zones, rural or residential. Now, is it proposed that the new bylaw just simply splits everything into rural or residential? So what happens to zoning, which is rural residential, which I live in a rural residential zone? Will that default to rural, the most liberal zone?
So through the chair, that is one of the pieces that the consultant spent a lot of time working on, because our old, the current bylaw doesn't really address the breadth and depth of zoning that we have in the region. And so the process will be with the new TRMP zoning in mind, will be to basically park each of the different types. We have 30 or 40 layers, I think now. They will be determined to be either rural or residential, urban or resident or rural through this process. There will be quite a triage involved there, and it will need to be quite fine grained in terms of specifics around where we are. But basically, if you're in what we would qualify as rural residential, then you probably are going to be residential.
Okay, I would have thought for the purpose of this, knowing the environment I live in, defaulting to the more liberal rural allowances would probably save more hassles than create hassles, if that's of any assistance to your people. And the other question I had was in relation to the beekeeping. I sort of couldn't follow the rationale in the paper. It seemed to say that there's been an increase of complaints about bee-related complaints since 2019, and that was the rationale for really tightening up clause 6. I read clause 6. It seemed to be quite picky, or quite specific, but I don't know if we've nailed it here either. So just my thoughts on the beekeeping clause. I would prefer we did not have to determine beekeeping issues on a case-by-case basis, because the amount of extra time, which equals cost and staff time, that would require. I don't think we've hit the money with the option. I much preferred option 2, which was the more common option with other councils. But anyway, those are my thoughts.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Councillor Cranston, and then Councillor Seymour. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. The graph, there's a suggestion that the graph is an indication of the effectiveness of the bylaws. Do you think there's other factors in there as well, or do you think it is the bylaws that's driving that downward pattern?
I think there's definitely going to be other factors and so on. The ones that we can quantify, what we're able to communicate here and so on. I think in terms of these are very hard to tell if the bylaw is having the desired effect or not. This suggests that it may well be, and it's still the only available tool, regulatory tool for councils to achieve this purpose. So that's the information that we have available.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I heard you say that we were not debating the detail today, but that we were looking at what the recommendation says and agreeing or otherwise that a bylaw is the most appropriate. So I have much pleasure in moving the recommendation.
Thank you for that. I was anxiously waiting for someone to move it.
The recommendations 1 and 2. I have to say the issue is quite complex, so I will add to that I hope that you have some rural based people around this table in the future when you do actually debate bylaw.
Thank you for that.
I'm happy to second, and to Councillor Seymour's point, obviously this is not necessarily asking for any guidance. I just did have a question around whether or not there was an option when you are consulting to actually combine some of the options when you're talking about how to illustrate where the rules apply, if it's possible to use zoning and maps, because obviously it's reasonably easy to map whole zones. Just because I really agree with the point raised in here that people tend to prefer where it's graphically obvious what category they fall into.
Thank you for that. So I have a mover and a seconder, Councillor Seymour and Councillor Warsnob. If there's no more discussion, Councillor Akwaha-Brown.
Councillor Seymour did, but I just note obviously on page 18 it says a little bit about cats, and I guess they're not in the list, but they come up often as being obviously concerning to native species, blah blah blah. But I just wondered, does the list have an opportunity to include other animal species?
It does. General clauses will obviously capture general nuisance, and so if you have defined nuisance by cats and so on, a lot of councils have steered away from trying to regulate cats through the animal nuisance bylaw because it is, at the end of the day, regulating cats. But there are some councils who are trying to do it. There are known issues, obviously, with native bird species and so on, where cats, and this is something that other jurisdictions around the world, Melbourne is a great example, where cats are, your cats cannot be outside at night, things like this and so on. Very, very hard to enforce. And so for this bylaw at this time, it has been deemed out of scope.
Okay, Councillor Burdett.
Thank you, Chair. You did say not to get into detail, but I do have an issue. On page 26, 42, 2B, permanently removing, including disposal of the animal, so it no longer causes a nuisance to others. Specifically, I interpret that as the impounding of animals. Sorry.
Apology accepted.
Yeah, sorry about that, but hi, this is serious stuff in the region I'm responsible for. How do we intend to strengthen the bylaw to make sure that our staff have adequate tools to be able to carry out their job?
Through the chair, this is the perennial issue with a lot of bylaws made under the Local Government Act, where we simply lack sufficient enforcement capabilities that the legislation tries to us. We don't have an enabling act, such as the Food and Camping Act or the Dog Control Act that prescribes particular powers. Then the powers that you see laid out in this bylaw are all we can apply to the situation. So central government deems it worthy of reviewing that. That's where we are forced to make.
Supplementary, Madam Chair, and further to that, and I'm very conscious of this because of the accidents that have happened. Our staff do an excellent job. They're out at night when called on. So all I want to see is council take more responsibility in terms of when they impound the stock. It comes to either Gisborne or they pound it to Puya. Right at present, that doesn't happen. So I'm just putting that on the table. You people, the policy setters, we're the decision makers. Please ensure that our staff are well supported by regulation.
Thank you for that. Okay, if we have no more kōrero, I'm going to put it to the floor. Mover, Councillor Seymour, seconder, Councillor Worsnop. And that is that we determine a bylaw is the most appropriate and proportionate way of addressing the issues arising from the keeping of animals, poultry and bees in Tairawhiti, and approve the review of the keeping of animals, poultry and bees bylaw 2012. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Gilmore. Much appreciated. Interesting work ahead. Okay, councillors, we move to another interesting kaupapa, our East Coast groundwater monitoring drilling, which have been happening up and down the coast and more planned. I am going to Tom.
So Tom Porter will talk to this paper, our Environmental and Science Manager.
Welcome, Mr. Porter. You can walk us through it and then we'll open it up for councillors for questions and queries.
Morning, Tato. Nice to see you all again. So following on from the Uawa drilling project, which I think you all know about, we received long-term plan funding to undertake more groundwater scientific bore drilling further up the coast. And so we've carried out some desktop analysis of the geology of the area and highlighted some aquifers where we will undertake some bore drilling. This is a requirement of the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, because these are areas where we don't have considerable information on the quality and quantity of water in these groundwater aquifers. And the bores will be purely for scientific information, and there will be a good indicator for climate change. These are going to be long-term bores, so we can see, for example, if there's increase in salinity through sea level rising, and also a way of seeing downstream effects from pollution from surrounding land use, etc. We have a comprehensive engagement plan in place, and we will be engaging with iwi and hapu and the local communities, including schools, for the drilling projects. We've learned our lessons from what worked well with the Uawa bore drilling and hope to replicate that in the communities further up the coast.
Kia ora for that. Councillor Robinson, thank you. Thank you. Oh, just made it.
Well, no, I had a prompting from Mr. Sheldrake. It's really exciting, and I hope you're at this table or listening in by Zoom to hear our future results. Just remind us, You brought a paper to us, I'm going to sound really dumb describing it, but about a plane which would fly over and some system. Is that being used? What is it doing? And my memory was it was only doing the lower half, not up the coast, right? No, so and what's the timeframes around that? I was just wondering how that fitted, dovetailed in with this.
Absolutely. Through the chair, that's a project being run by a group called AIA, Aqua Intel Aotearoa, who are a mixture of GNS and Kanoa, who are the delivery arm of the PGF. And so it's a helicopter, it's called SkyTem, if you'd like to Google it. And it's a helicopter that's going to be flown. They're also going to drill some groundwater bores, and they're also going to do some monitoring of flows. They're doing the Poverty Bay flats, but they're also doing at least 3 of the catchments up the coast. We've been in discussions with them, as you know, throughout this conversation. So these bores we're going to drill are going to complement them. So we're going to put in areas, they have different parameters for their funding streams. So our bores are going to be in areas that they're not necessarily going to drill, but will complement their things. And the great picture for us is that this flying information we're going to get, which is going to admittedly take 2 or 3 years to get this data back, but the bores we will drill will be able to provide us with some information to confirm calibration, validation, that kind of thing.
Councillor Foster and
Yeah,
then
thank you.
Councillor Seymour. Thank you.
Is there any existing sites up the coast anywhere that people are using groundwater for either irrigation or for personal use, other than the sites that have been identified? To our knowledge.
Yes, to the chair, yes, there are.
Okay, so have those sites been monitored at all for capacity or quality or anything like that, or has that just been up to the landowners to look after that?
Through you, Chair, because they're private bores, we don't go onto that land and use those bores to monitor, and often they don't meet the requirements that we need to undertake our state of the environment monitoring. There are, for example, bores around Waipu landfill that we do monitor to see the impact that the landfill is or isn't having on the environment, but nothing that meets the requirements we have for a state of the environment program.
And to the chair, if I can just add to that, we're deliberately putting these bores in council-owned or managed land, so in road corridors, etc. So we will continue to be able to have access to these bores. And as we see with the Poverty Bay flats, where we have some bores that have been there for 40+ years, us as scientists will be able to look at the real long-term trends, and it's brilliant for us. So that's what we're looking to have, these bores that we actually can control. Our teams will go out and monitor several times a year, and we can always maintain that access and the quality of those.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour. No. Thank you.
I'm happy to second. Needs to make made clear that some of those bores that were mentioned latterly that are on private property, bores didn't have to have a permit for stock water or household use, so then they're not necessarily illegal bores, they're bores that have been there for a long time, just to make that clarification. And I just thank Mr. Porter for the paper. Can I just ask though, you suggested, and while this is around the 3 areas to the north, you mentioned that there was to be a flyover of the Poultry Bay flats. For those landowners that are going to be have their ground area monitored, flown over, have they been contacted and advised?
This engagement process is starting now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Councillor Akawata-Brown and then Councillor Burdett.
Thank you so much for the paper. And yes, indeed, it's an interesting space where obviously water is, well, as our gold and concerns for it are high. I see one of the areas of interest, Karakia Fiddle. I just wanted, in light of kind of conversations that are happening in that space, where does this fit with regard to those that are considering, or feasibility around barge and looking at alluvial space? Just what becomes the priority if water is obviously really a high need in protection of and all of that use of it. Where do they sit? Will you be looking at their feasibility as part of this, or is it just a total different kick?
Through the chair, from my perspective, this is purely for long-term scientific monitoring boards, and that's all we're looking to do.
Thank you.
Councillor Burdett, thank you.
Given, Tom, what you just reported to us, the issue about Whakaaro Park and the bore that's put in there, when will council move to the next stage of the development in terms of supply to the communities. Because if you're talking 3 years out to totally assess the whole question of the water, the northern area will suffer. And the premise behind development of Whakarua Park was to supply not only the Ruatoria community, but the wider community. We put the first stage in, been relatively successful. Now we need to go to the second stage. We have had a delivery from David on this, but no timelines.
I think that's part of a different paper coming to us, but maybe a quick short answer, no quick short answer.
So through you, Chair, I guess the quick answer is that as that Ruatoria water supply program is going through its own sort of project plan and process, it's not waiting for our long-term state of the environment monitoring boards to be in place and to have 5 or 10 years of data. But Mr. Wilson will be able to provide you with more detail on that.
So having listened to that, Madam Chair, I can assume something will happen in the new year.
Let's not make assumptions like that, but thank you for your comment. Noted. Any more questions from councillors? If not, councillors, this is a noting report. Thank you. The purpose of this report, East Coast Groundwater Monitoring Drilling Program, and just notes the contents. I have a mover in Councillor Robinson and a seconder in Councillor Seymour. All in favour, contrary, carried. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Porter. Are you staying for the freshwater monitoring review?
I am indeed.
Oh, lovely. So you can give us a quick overview and then we'll open it up. It's also a noting report.
So through you, Chair, I'll just do an introduction. We've sort of got a trilogy of papers next. So I'll do the intro to the trilogy, and then Tom and Yannick will be presenting on the papers. So 3 freshwater related papers sort of taking us through the policy cycle of monitor, review, plan and do, all related to the national direction we have under the National Policy Statement for Freshwater and the associated regulations that cover things like intensive winter grazing, farm planning, wetlands, stock exclusion. As you can see, there is a lot of work happening in this freshwater area. It's all interlinked. We are working very closely together, and it doesn't just involve staff from strategy and science. It's a sort of an across council effort, and I'm hoping that comes through in the papers. And I would just like to take this chance to acknowledge the staff for all the hard work they are doing, because they have the real, I guess, commitment and passion to this kaupapa, and I'm hoping that comes through in these reports. So over to you, Tom.
Kia ora, Jo. So this paper, we undertook an independent review, or we procured an independent review by NIWA, who are Crown Research Institute, to review our freshwater monitoring network. We gather a lot of data through this network, 13,000 individual water quality parameters, for example, 41 million data points. To me, they're all big and impressive information, but we just wanted to have an independent check to see that what we were doing meets the requirements of the National Policy Statement for freshwater, but also is pragmatic and it does what we want it to be doing. So that report has been undertaken, that review, and overall the feedback has been very positive, that we have a good monitoring network. It's very robust, and our state of the environment is well monitored. However, there are some additional requirements, mainly come through from the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, which is the same for every regional council throughout the country. And so they have suggested some potential improvements we could do, some of which are low cost and low risk, which we've already started to implement. Others which may require some more resourcing. For example, a pragmatic view, it's all undertaken by the environmental monitoring team, which Pete Hancock is the team lead, and I think you know. We have to look into this practical terms in regards to some of the parameters we need to go and record may need 2 members of staff. And what does that do to our sampling regimes? We need to look at that in a pragmatic basis on what it actually means to our day-to-day business as usual work. But for me, the main thing was that actually we're doing well. Just a few minor tweaks can make it really a really good, strong, robust evidence base for the rest of this freshwater work that we're working on at the moment. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Mr. Porter. Councillor Faulkner, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good morning. I wanted to move the paper for noting and acknowledge in particular the foresight I think that the team have taken into delivery of this of these papers, but our freshwater monitoring, planning and management going forward. My question was actually around, you've touched on what will cost us, i.e. extra team members, resource and time. I was actually interested in the good news stories, i.e. the what is of little cost or no cost to us that we can actually talk about now.
Peter Hancock, I know you're here. Would you mind being able to just explain a couple of the implementation from your team, the sort of low cost immediate?
Yeah, there's a lot of technical detail and around certain laboratory tests that we can transition towards. So you kind of drop, you might do 2 tests for a period of time for a year, drop one, move forward with the new standard. I guess across the regional sector, we're looking for a lot of consistency and there's a lot of discussion around data federation and that like. So if we can move towards consistent suites of parameters, then that's an easy one. Kind of no net cost. We can just do that immediately. That's one example. Yep.
And through the chair, if I might just add, for example, we're looking into the potential that 2 members of staff for health and safety reasons may need to go to a site. Now, while initially we looked at that and thought that will involve a lot more effort, actually having 2 people on site means you can work quicker because while someone's setting something up, someone can be implementing something. So there are those wins we could potentially have there as well.
Okay, next is Councillor Robinson, then Councillor Cranston, and then Councillor Akwater-Brown. Are you waving at me, or that's Councillor Akwater-Brown after that? Thank you.
First up, I want to just acknowledge, to talk with your words, Joe, the quality of these reports is really outstanding, and it is really reassuring that we just seem to have an amazing team in this region, because as we will know, it's been said today, gold is so imperative to our region, water is so imperative to our region. It is gold. I really also want to acknowledge the climate change, the paragraph on climate change, paragraph 32. That was really cool to read that. That's really impressive, and it's you taking it serious, and I appreciate that on behalf of our community. I was surprised that this paper came to us. It's really interesting, but then you're saying in January, actually, you're going to bring us a paper to say what of the recommendations we can afford to implement. And my query dovetails with Sandra's, is really around paragraph, let me just find it, sorry, page 78, the 3rd paragraph under the summary. I couldn't reconcile what you're actually saying. Are you saying that we are not possibly going to be able to afford to implement all of the recommendations? And if so, are we then going to fall short of the standard we aspire to or have been recommended to achieve under the NIWA review? That's the bottom line that I want to understand. I also understand that that information is going to come back to us in January, or an iteration of us, but can you just maybe shed some light on that paragraph, because that was the one that left me feeling a bit nervous.
Through the chair, we will be able to fund it. There's funding available through the Tairawhiti resource management plan. It's more making sure that what we do makes economic sense for ourselves and the team and for our ratepayers. So NIWA have been very open that these are their considerations, but they're coming from a very much scientific, technical view. There's all these, for example, you mentioned the climate and the miles that we might have to drive, the effect this has on the team workload. If this means we need more staff, we will have to recruit more. So there's all these aspects that we need to consider over the next, while we take time to digest. We wanted to get this report in front of you and share the good news and to get your immediate feedback, but we have a process now to go through over the next few days, to a few months, not just going to be days, over the next few months, to really look at how this affects us pragmatically. Does that answer your question, Tony?
Yeah, that's really helpful, Tom. So do we infer from that really what's going to come back in January won't be anything particularly scary or outstandingly different from what you've just said?
Through you, Chair. So what's coming back in January is something that will come to me, and we'll work within our existing operational budgets. The bigger question is if we're through the process of working through the report and working with our communities in the catchments, is whether there is more that's needed. And probably the biggest question is around lakes monitoring and the extent to which we do or don't monitor what has been, I suppose, identified as a lake. Yeah, so that's the big question. We could spend an awful lot of money monitoring lakes, but the value that would actually give back to us and the community in Mana Whenua is really the question there.
Final supplementary question was in relation to the costing and this, are we partnering with any Mana Whenua groups on this, and is there any cost sharing, or are we carrying the full financial burden of this?
So through you, Chair, at the moment, we carry the full financial burden. We are keen to explore how we could partner with others, particularly Mana Whenua, to deliver some of this monitoring work.
Okay, Councillor Cranston and then Councillor Akwater-Brown. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the paper's under a very general topic of freshwater planning. And most of the waterways throughout the region do have a mention there. But we had a site visit out to Tairawhiti, which is a major water area of our region, but it's got no mention. And we were pointed out all the issues with that river, but how did all these rivers get in and not the Tairawhiti? And what's the process of looking at the issues with Tairawhiti?
Through the chair, every river in the region was considered within the report.
It doesn't feature major.
So through you, Chair, we haven't given you a copy of the full report. If you're interested in seeing that, we can provide it, just because it's a 100-page document with a lot of technical detail. Obviously, there is monitoring on Tairawhiti, particularly because it's a water source for the city. Yeah.
It was a very, yeah. Because we went out there and had a public deputation on it, and then we went out and saw it. I just want to know where we're going with it from here on in, because we saw the issues.
Yeah, through the chair, it will continue to be part of our State of the Environment Monitoring Network, and we will continue to do monitoring on that stretch.
Thank you. Councillor Akwater-Brown, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is just in respect to just a small paragraph noting the Hangaroa Katori, is it? Sorry, my eyesight's fading me. But Rukatori. Sorry, catchment is also monitored by Hawke's Bay Regional Council. And I just wondered across our region, is there other parts of it that is monitored by another council? And the benefits to that space, be it maybe they're resourced to do some work, and do they give us a call to let you know what's going on, or you're sharing reports, etc. I just wondered, but just do they monitor any other parts of the region?
Through the chair, for that catchment itself, I met with the science managers from Hawke's Bay Regional Council about 3 weeks ago to discuss that, and we discussed better ways of working together. Yes, they're completely happy because it drains into their region. They have that vested interest, so I just checked in with them that they were happy to carry on that. But we, in discussions regarding hydrology, and particularly with any flood events and future flood events, we've agreed to work better, have better communication between us, so that they can, for example, make a run, and a run is when you follow a kind of flood and take gaugings. They could potentially do that and end up in Gisborne, and therefore give us information from Gisborne, and likewise we could potentially go down and meet somewhere like Mahia and just work a bit better together, and that's something. Peter Hancock, do you have anything else to add from your experience of working with other regional councils? Bay of Plenty?
We have a very good working relationship with Bay of Plenty and Hawke's Bay Regional Council. Our regional boundaries are quite unique in that they slice off sections of catchments. So it is important that we work well with our neighbours. Yeah, supporting Tom's comments about Hawke's Bay Regional Council. In terms of Bay of Plenty, there's the Motu catchment is the big one. There's the Koranga as well. Yeah, we will work with that council, but probably less so than we would with Hawke's Bay.
Thank you for that. So councillors, I have a mover and councillor Faulkner. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, councillor Robinson. Any more discussions, query? If not, I'll put it to you. Moved by councillor Faulkner, seconded by councillor Robinson. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you for that, Mr. Porter. Much
Thanks, everyone.
appreciated. Okay. Yannick, welcome to the table. Councillors, we move to page 91, our freshwater planning update. I'll open the floor to you just to give us a 1 minute, and then we will open it up for, or maybe if you wanted 5 or 10 minutes, that's fine as well. Just saying.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora tātou. Really good to see you guys again. Ms. Noble's stolen my thunder. I was going to say exactly what she was going to say. Perhaps I might iterate again the importance of bringing these 3 papers together, which really just shows how integrated all of this work is. So it's not just policy working in a vacuum. Our team works very closely with the science and environmental monitoring teams. We've got a very good broader team set up to work on all of the issues. The science and the environmental monitoring teams are vital to developing the evidence base that we need to write our policies. We can't write policy, we can't bring options for our elected reps to consider if we don't have a solid and robust evidence base. So that relationship is really important. But the other thing that's also really important is the implementation and the actions that follow through from the policy as well. And we've embarked on that journey, particularly through the Waipawa catchment plan that we developed in 2014 and 15. And I guess with the legislation moving where it is and the community interest in implementation works, it becomes a really vital space. And there's a question for council to entertain in terms of how it's involved in those projects and how we can develop a more strategic and systematic approach to on the ground work. I guess that follows from the policy. How do we work with landowners? How do we fund this work in order to see the outcomes that our communities and council wants to see in our region? So that's the reason why we brought these papers to this agenda, and I'll take those reports as read, but I just really wanted to make that statement and reiterate what Ms. Noble said. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Worsnop, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the report, Yannick. My question is regards to page 91. I note that the regional wetland extent modelling has been completed. When will that be available to probably this table, and B, the wider public, noting obviously that the ground truthing is yet to take place and possibly won't take place for a year or so?
Through you, Madam Chair. We're mindful that it's an operational piece of work, and I guess the main thing that we don't want to do is to make it public and then kind of alarm people, around the 2,700 parcels that have been identified through a desktop exercise. It is a desktop exercise, and those parcels need to be verified in a fairly logical manner. And so we're mindful of the methodology. It needs to be developed first before we start to roll this project out. We're doing that now, and we will look to undertake some of that ground truthing once we've got a project plan and engagement plan in place, and that will sit alongside the work that we're doing in the regional freshwater plan as well as the Waipawa catchment plan. Makes sense to start undertaking that practical work as soon as we can, while we have budget to do that work, and while the catchment plans are being developed as well, where we've got a good relationship with landowners and Manawhenua. So the work, in a nutshell, Councillor, that we'll look to begin very soon.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Burdett. Oh, Larry first and then Burdett. Sorry, Larry. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Yannick. Yeah, great paper. My question is, actually, there's a thing on the first page 91 about the fish passage for the Waipawa catchment. And I just want to know what the priority is. I mean, I'm just heading on to what with Councillor Councillor Cranston said before about the Tairawhiti, we visited out there and there was obvious areas there that fish passage was just unbelievably non-existable because of the blockages at that river system. And I imagine there's quite a few other river systems that do have that after extreme weather events. And my question is, what priority is put on trying to alleviate those passages so fish can have a fish passage? Yeah, yeah. So I'd like to know what priority that is given. You know, if as opposed to just even being blocked and left blocked. You know, does a fish passage enable us to be able to act faster on those river systems?
Through you, Chair, our science team members are probably better positioned to answer that question, but my understanding is that there's a pragmatic approach to it, what's achievable and what's affordable in terms of the prioritization. But there's lots of fish passage barriers there that we need to address across that catchment and indeed across the whole region. But there is an element of pragmatism in terms of what we can actually do.
Okay, Councillor Bill Burdett, thank you.
Thank you, Yannick. This is a very good paper. My question is, and bear in mind, I wear a coast hat. I looked at all these projects, very interesting, but they're all five or 10 miles from town, if that. What about the rural sector? Where do they feature? This is a Gisborne District Council, or will you get to that in time? The water question is a serious one, critical for all of us.
Through you, Chair, I would imagine that we will entertain further work through the catchment planning process and the wider corridor with freshwater planning as well, as particularly as we start to go up the coast and have those conversations.
Councillor Seymour, thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move receipt of the paper. I acknowledge all of the papers this morning, and thank you for that. But I was just wondering if maybe Ms. Noble can give me an indication of if the level to which this information is feeding into the establishment of the water security program, which was paper 21-189, and we had that paper in September 21. There's 2 or 3 references in here which are consistent, and the work plan for that paper was year 1 to 3. So how is that paper getting on? To what level of benefit are these 3 papers we've had this morning going to feed into that?
Yeah, so the 2 programs are working very closely together. Our current focus for that regional water security program, and I do acknowledge we haven't brought a paper back to council on that recently, is doing a regional water assessment, which will look at both current supply and demand and projected supply and demand. And that will feed directly into the freshwater planning and catchment planning work that Yannick is leading. So they're very closely aligned. Same people sort of feeding into both work streams.
And one would assume that subsequent to that the material gathered in the paper referred to a moment ago is going to feed your data into the total planning process. But
yes, that's correct.
That, I mean, it's critical to understand what we have there already. And in time, more rural catchments will be studied, as has been pointed out to us this morning.
Through you, Chair,
Yep.
yes, that's correct. That first paper we heard from Tom really explained that we're trying to expand our knowledge base.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Can I suggest that it would be really good to have one big paper in the new triennium, maybe in the new year, that pulls all of these pieces of work, because we've been doing work in this area for quite a long time. Some people are familiar with it and some are not, but to pull it together so it's not isolated would be probably really helpful for new elected members. And then to Councillor Cranston's valid question around the TRI, which was about conservation as well as water. On page 98 of this paper, one assumes that the TRI is captured in the Waikawa catchment plan because it is a feeder to that river. So there's a list there under freshwater planning and Tairawhiti, but it doesn't mention TRI, but in actual fact, it's a part of the first bullet point. Isn't it? Good.
Further to that, Madam Chair, it's its own freshwater management unit, and we'll be looking to engage Rongo-Whakata, Iwi and Hapu on that freshwater management unit in the very near future.
But it does feed to the Waikawa.
Yes.
And is it, so some of that work, I'm referring to the point on item 5 on page 93, and just under the second bullet point, and you've got Waipawa identified, and then the other smaller catchments that we're working on. But I'm just wanting to make it clear for the benefit of readers that, so that we all know and understand that TRI is captured into that.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Madam
councillor
Chair.
Seymour.
Happy to move the paper.
Okay, councillor Robinson. Thank you.
Thank you. And I look forward to that paper, Joe, that Councillor Seymour has requested. Well, assuming I'm here. The Tairawhiti, what defines a catchment? The Tairawhiti is, from the next paper, is a sort of distant cousin under the Waipawa catchment plan. I mean, the Tairawhiti is a really challenging environment, and I think is going to become more prominent. Certainly, it's something I receive a lot of kōrero from the public about. So does it deserve its own catchment plan because it has such a specific intensive area feeding it?
Through the chair, it's a fair question. When we developed the Waipawa catchment plan in 2014-15, we included the Tairawhiti catchment, which is its own catchment, within the wider Waipawa, as well as the Waikanai. Believe it or not, the Waikanai stream has its own catchment area as well, for expeditious reasons to make the planning process more efficient. But what we would recognise in the Tairawhiti is its own unique characteristics, which Peter Hancock can speak to far more effectively than I can. But we do recognise that as a very distinctive area that we need to manage more carefully and especially for water quality issues.
Noting that, is it something that maybe would warrant being pulled out from the Waipawa and made its own distinctive
Through
catchment?
you, Chair, just to clarify, within our catchment plans, which are quite broad areas, because otherwise we'd be going back and re-engaging with the same people over and over and over again, we have what we call freshwater management units, and that's where we can distinctly focus in on the characteristics of a particular water body and its catchment, for example, the Tairawhiti.
So the community can be confident it's not going to get lost, that because it is something that's going to become more and more important. We're doing the restoration project on it. You're doing the research on the water quality, and I think it's going to become quite imperative.
Okay, councillors, I have a mover in councillor Seymour, a seconder and councillor Burdett. No more chats. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you for this paper. Very good to get an update. And yes, I do look forward for when we are in the in a situation where we can pull everything together and have that bigger picture. Freshwater implementation, page 114. Ms. Noble, Mr. Slupski. It's all, the floor is all yours, or do you take it as read and we open for questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I kind of said all I wanted to say before,
Good.
so I'll take it as read. Thank you.
Take it as read. Councillors, if there are questions, it is a very thorough, nice, good update on where we are at and what we are doing in this area. Any questions? Councillor Faulkner and then Councillor Warsnop. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just going to get in first with a request, actually. Having worked through this space for, it seems like many years now, my request is actually around freshwater farm plans and the existing requirement for a number of on-farm plans, be they environmental, biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. We are in a position as a region to front load this in such a way that we can simplify the on-farm business planning to include freshwater rather than creating yet another plan that sits in a desk drawer in the farm office. Yet another level of compliance when it could be integrated into others. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that before we launch off and create another silo to plan for. And I'd like to move the paper.
Thank you for that.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's a really, really good point. Because the last thing we want to do is duplicate the efforts that have already been done in the farm planning space, and we will avoid that as best we can. And we'll do that through having really, really good communications with landowners to make sure that the material that has already been developed is actually used in the next tranche of work.
Through you, Chair, just to add to that, and to your point about integration on all the different plans that may or may not be required, that is very much on our minds as well. And we are doing all we can at a staff level to advocate and engage with officials from the various central government departments to ensure that that is a pathway that remains open to us.
Thank you. Councillor Wolfsnop and then Councillor Seymour.
Thank you. The couple of points I wanted to highlight was just in some ways, maybe parts of this report are relevant to what we were talking about earlier, and that the pilot is probably going to inform the obligation that is going to be placed on landowners. And I would urge you or us as an organisation to understand the extent to which that is deliverable within what are very clearly financial constraints, physical constraints in terms of you can't deliver everything all at once, especially when it amounts to vast sums of money and a lot of time and resources. So I guess the sequencing is what I'm a little bit concerned about. Our pilot may not be ready in time. Well, it may not provide information in time to inform the expectations that we then put in the TRMP freshwater areas. How do we sequence that in a way that makes sure that the pilot actually is useful in that respect? And I like the fact that there are a number of times here, I think it's on page, what page is that? Wait, page 120. It does talk a lot about resourcing and how this is going to be resourced, because frankly, the expectations, particularly around wetlands, are substantial if the definition simply includes, the definition being mostly wetland species, because we are a region of rushes. So, but yeah, first point is the sequencing, and then how useful it will be. Secondly, what happens to the plans that we already have that people have spent, in some cases, a lot of money on, that no longer meet the criteria? Do they then need to go and, well, presumably they do need to go and spend more money? And how many iterations of this can we expect people to just suck up? Because it's a big thing to ask, and there's probably a risk that people start to get quite cranky with the process. So yeah, just your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Through your worship. It's a few things to unpack there. I guess with regards to sequencing, we're actually still waiting for more information and guidance from central government as well. The pilot will inform, hopefully, the development of regulations. So the second set of regulations, we have one set already in part 9A of the RMA. We're waiting for the details. The pilot is to test some of the assumptions around the farm planning framework, and then the lessons will be taken back to the ministry team responsible for developing those regulations. They come back to us, and then we try to make sense of them, and in turn translate them into our TRMP. So there's probably a couple of steps that need to be taken by government first before we can actually understand, okay, what's the rub here? So that's the first question. How useful the broad intent of freshwater farm plans is, in my perspective, reasonable. That is, you look at the risk areas on your farm and you identify ways to mitigate those risks to reduce the impact on receiving environments. It's it in a nutshell, which seems eminently responsible, and we'll look to integrate that with our freshwater planning process as best we can. What happens to existing plans is similar to what Councillor Faulkner was saying, I guess, in terms of trying to use the existing information as best we can through this new process. We'll try to make that process as simple and as painless as possible. We'll look to the ministry for supporting us with resourcing and other requirements to do that. How many iterations? Let's hope that this one is the main one, and we can actually move forward with confidence as a region. And actually that this process as a whole is actually the one that is transformative for our region, and not just a rubber stamping process. Kia ora.
Just a quick supplementary. Noting that we are supposed to, like, we've been given a 2024 timeline, my understanding is, for the freshwater components of the TRM, well, just that's the national. Is the government likely to change that, given what you've just said about the moving feast with regards to their approach? Because we will almost certainly run out of time based on what you've just said.
Through you, Madam Chair, the timeframes for freshwater farm plans, my understanding is that they will be different. They will be rolled out across several tranches, of which Gisborne will be one of the first regions to roll the farm plans out.
Microphone, speak up.
So through you, Chair, because the freshwater farm plans will be by national regulation, they don't need to be incorporated within the TRMP. They are something that can override the provisions that are in our plan.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask the CEO to comment and then Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to make mention, and it is briefly mentioned on page 119 of the report, and Ms Noble might be able to elaborate on it a bit more, but in terms of pilots, they do come with a lot of intense requirement around resourcing. I think the opportunity here is when we had engagement previously with Māori landowners, Māori corporations were really keen to work in partnership around developing up how we might work together, given our significant amount of Māori owned land and their involvement in the farming sector. So it does provide us an opportunity to work really closely with them, hopefully lean in on some of the resources, human resources that they have to lead to this pilot project.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour, before you speak, I just want to apologise to Councillor Gregory, who I've blatantly ignored. I always say, text me if you're on Zoom and you want to speak. She texted several times and the papers have now passed. So Councillor Gregory, I'm sorry about that. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the Chief Executive for her comments. I have some queries around the same elements, and the first one was the timing. This is 24 on the page of bottom of 119. So what is the timing likely to be for this process of the regional pilots? How many properties are we likely to have funding for? One would hope a really broad cross section, because this district has a wide variety. Farms are not one thing. And I would have to say that farmers have spent years looking at the risks of where their water comes from, because they wouldn't still be farming economically if they hadn't taken precautions. So we just have to make it clear that they are not sitting out there doing nothing. So farmers do very conscious of, and I just thought as we sat here and listened, you know, over the last 25 years, we've had downpours in Whakakī, Murawai, Tolaga Bay and inland Tukumara Bay. So every time we have a significant rainfall event in any one area, that obviously has a different impact on the farm plans and the farms in that area. So to start with, what's the timing? And I understand there's still a lot of questions, and I think Steve for the comments around half of us don't even know what we're trying to do for the government plan just yet, because it's not clear.
Through you, Madam Chair, the timing is an easy question to answer, actually. That is, we've got until the end of the year, in fact, the end of November, to roll the pilot out for this region. In terms of the number of farms, we have to be realistic in terms of what we can achieve for this process. So we're looking at around 10 farms to apply this pilot to. We'll be looking to contact landowners in the next couple of weeks.
So is it intended to capture agriculture and horticulture in the farm plan?
Yes.
Which limits the number of.
Correct, and that speaks to one of your other points around having a cross section. So we would look to having a good representation of farms that are typical for our region, so pastoral as well as horticultural.
Sure, but that does not. And it's really good to hear comments the Chief Executive has made. And if we think back over government induced initiatives in this town, in our region, overlay 3A was really challenging for Māori land because of the costs involved. So it's all very well for government to decide that we'll do X, Y, Z it then requires landowners to be able to implement whatever X, Y, and Z ends up being. So we need to be really mindful of that as we go along, because that overlay 3A did present real difficulties for some landowners to participate in. So we need to be cognizant of those issues. I don't think you have a mover yet for this paper either, Madam. Sandra, I'll second
Yes,
it.
thank you, councillor Seymour.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting process, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it, but 10 properties covering pastoral and agricultural horticulture is not going to give you that many examples, is it? You just have to do the best you can with it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Akwata Brown.
Oh, thank you, Yannick. I just wanted to start with a thank you to council and staff and everyone that has been involved with riparian planting across the region. I always get excited about seeing it through parts of the spaces I move in. Obviously, I'm passionate about the Waikanae stream. I've kind of been given that space through my husband, really. But so thank you, you know, for all that is happening in the space. And I guess we'll still see more of that feature across regions, because, you know, we still need to consider that space to keep, you know, river spaces well and good for the future as per our 2050 hope. But I just wanted to come back to, I guess, the rural community having more legislative processes from government, central government, and we as representative elects of this region, will the pilots give real pushback from a localism to some of the frustration that we, obviously we hear throughout the community, especially our rural, going into this next phase around the table here, ensuring that, they are being heard around, costings, extra costings, all of that space. And I just wondered, within the pilot, will there be, space, or is that going to be allowing them to say, gosh, we've already just spent this money doing this on our farms, and now this is the new legislative requirements, whilst we appreciate environmental changes, climate change mitigation, all of that. But I just, we are going to be tasked to be really cognizant as locals, representatives, to make sure our rural communities feel their concerns are heard, but also that something's being done in the pushback space of saying, hey, listen, we've got to make money, we've got to live, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted, in the pilot space, is that a consideration within it?
Chair, yes.
Oh, thank you.
No, not to be so facetious, but the intention of the pilot is really just to test the freshwater farm plan framework, if you will, to get some experience from it, to, I guess, to inform the ministry team just of how well, where the bugs are, what are some of the constraints, where should councils fit in this process. And undoubtedly, one of the messages will be around resourcing and whether there's adequacy there and where the constraints are as well. Absolutely.
Right of reply, Councillor Faulkner.
Not so much right of reply, Your Worship. Thank you for the chance to speak again. But I do want to reiterate my colleague, Councillor Akahata Brown, around her comments about cost, because when you go to page 139 and you look at the, I'm not sure where that diagram was sourced from, whether it's ours or has come from elsewhere. I can see about 5 separate costs attached to that plan if you are a rural business. That horrifies me, and it needs to be noted, front-loaded, when it comes to our consideration of these things.
And through you, Chair, we don't want to predetermine the feedback we'll get from landowners during the pilot, but I imagine cost will be something that we hear loud and clear and will feed back to officials at MFE.
Every time it says here that a audit or a recognised industry assurance program or a on-farm risk assessment or any of those things, they all cost these days. There is no such thing as a free lunch anymore. So I just want to note that front and centre. Thank you.
I've got a mover in councillor Faulkner, a seconder in councillor Seymour, all in favour, contrary, carried. Joe, Yannick, thank you so much for a very extensive suite of papers, informative, good to keep us updated, and we look forward to an update on this as well. Councillor Wharehinga.
Sorry, Your Worship, while I was checking for if I'd received any notices about anyone's apologies, I'd missed something that I wanted to mention in regards to our governance work plan, just ask about clarification. Is that okay if I do that now?
Yep.
It's in regards to the Cobham School neighbourhood play system was supposed to be reported at this meeting. Am I assuming that it's going to be reported at the next one? The Cobham School neighbourhood play system, according to our governance work plan, was supposed to be reported at this meeting.
Thank you. Thanks for that. We'll get a report back on that. What happened there?
Thank you.
Okay, councillors, thank you very much. I know because I've been texting her feverishly now since I've forgotten about her. Thank you very much, and to staff, thank you very much as well. I declare our sustainable Tairawhiti meeting closed. Thank you, Heather.